Now, we are going to be joined by a very optimistic man. I'm not sure if he likes that introduction. Managing Director for NZAB. Welcome back to Sarah's Country. This is Scott Wishart. How are you this evening, sir?
Yeah, evening, Sarah. I'm really well, thanks. How are you?
Good, good. Now, it has been some time since we've talked, and in between times, there's been a thing called COVID-19. How has that affected a lot of your farming clients and that appetite for risk?
Yeah, it's been interesting. So I suppose farming has been, one of the luckiest sectors in terms of direct impact. We pretty much had to carry on as usual, notwithstanding issues around supply chains and stock and feed and those other things that did cause us a few issues. But in typical farming fashion, it's just another crisis to deal with in the marathon that is farming. It's by no means a sprint. So I think we're getting pretty good at dealing with these challenges as they come towards us.
That's a very good point. You're talking here about the long game, not the short game. And this blog post is fantastic where you're talking Al Pacino, Any Given Sunday. I've been critical for so long about the short-minded cash flow nature that farming has become because the banks have demanded that. Are we getting to a point where we can have long-term strategies and long-term environmental investment with the banks backing this with the change in capital restructuring?
I still think that, I think fundamentally farmers have to have that long-term strategy and they have to understand what that looks like and be executing on it. The banking sector is still focused short because they have their own constraints around capital, they have their own annual plans they have to meet, they're a commercial business. The real challenge is how do you make a long-term intergenerational business fit in a short-term capital provided market? And I suppose we still haven't solved all of the problems there. Banking is still banking, but I think we are finding some success where, longer term strategies make sense, and we can demonstrate the value of that to the risk that the banks face. We've got clients looking at investment opportunities at the moment, whether it be development or irrigation, that can yield, 15 to 40% return on capital. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to be paying off debt instead of taking those opportunities because quite clearly they improve a business's risk. But look, there's still some challenges there, and I think we see appetite starting to return to the banking sector in some quarters, which isn't a surprise. We always see it as a cyclical sort of a business, and it's great to see. But there is still we still see a lot of capital or debt capital leaving the sector. It looks like it's heading into places like housing where the capital constraints are less and they can earn a greater return. And I still think that creates challenges for the agri sector. And I think there's two ways you can improve risk if you're a bank. One is you can improve the quality of the clients by helping them repay debt and invest in growth, or you can increase price until it matches the risk profile that you think you have. And I suppose the latter does nothing to improve farming over time. And I think that's one thing I see as the greatest opportunity at the moment is for, from the Reserve Bank down through the leadership entities of each bank, what actually is the strategy here? How do we do more than just say values are down, pay more debt back, there's too much risk here? And I think it needs to be really tangible rather than sound bites. And, because we've got a lot of really great farmers in this country that are, they do have long-term strategies and those strategies make sense, but they're going to require continual investment. And, we are going to need long-term support here.
Yeah, and talking with Susan Kilsby, the economist there at ANZ, it's very hard for these banks to gain any form of certainty to base that risk off, both from environmental legislation and what the next coalition government will look like in terms of colours, let alone some of those very interesting exchange rate impacts where we've got a very high US dollar, yet it's an extremely dodgy US economy going forward. No one's actually prepared to give any direction, anything further than a couple of months out at the moment.
And look, again, back to where we started, it's a long-term game, not a short-term game. So, I think where we want to be placed is where we can absorb those short-term changes because we've got long-term strategy and long-term metrics that make sense. So fundamentally, the work continues in the same vein it has done for a few years now, and that is making sure that you have a really good business that can weather the storms. That you are reducing debt or improving your performance in order to take risk out of the business so that it can absorb those changes that we can't control. Really test your farming models. Are you using the resources you have as efficiently as you can? Do you have the right people around you? Do you make decisions in a timely manner? And I think fundamentally, if we continue to, as Tom Lemming did say in that article, if you grab the inches, that does add up. And, our business is about 3.5 years old now, and we're finding some of those inches we've been gaining over that period of time are really starting to pay off. And, the rolling stone does start to sort of, build up a bit. And I think we're seeing that those benefits. And, it's easy to say, that there should be some wholesale changes in how banks support farmers or how farmers, present themselves. But the reality is we just need to keep making those continual changes.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, this whole point was about optimism and where the opportunities lie for growth. There has been commentary around a falling farm sales slump. Is there opportunity there in a reset in that property market?
Look, absolutely. I mean, I think we're seeing, properties that are transacting, the yields on those opportunities are some of the better yields we've seen in a long time. And, with where interest rates are at the moment, on average, those yields are about twice the cost of capital. So, you have to be in a position where you can access those opportunities. It's a real challenge, but we're also seeing a lot of opportunities on farm with existing farms to make those investments, whether it be efficiency and irrigation or, some of the unexpected benefits of environmental policy, where we're actually seeing less inputs and not the same reduction in output that we thought we might have seen, and more efficiencies around stock and genetics. And those things are all really exciting. And talking to a lot of farmers lately who, talking about the constraints around nitrogen, and a lot of them do see it as an opportunity to think, well, if this is the market, if this is where we're heading, then how do we continue to drive the performance out of their farms? Mm-hmm. And seeing it as a challenge that they can actually get excited about. And I think that's the key.
You obviously look around internationally a lot at the risk and profile of banks internationally in other economies than ours. I was listening to some commentary around some strict protocol coming into the Canadian banks and them not much liking it. From a risk profile, are you feeling quite safe about how we are to weather the storm going into this global recession?
Well, look, I'm far from an expert around that, but from what I see and what I'm told, I think we're pretty well placed. I think the luxury we still have as a country and as a banking sector at the moment is how we invest our capital and what sort of time frame we put on our returns. And so I think that's, again, the challenge to the banking sector and the regulators in New Zealand is, let's continue to get in behind those that are producing real revenue and real GDP for the country, and make sure that we take the opportunities that are in front of us right now, because I think they are many and they are extremely valuable for New Zealand.
Thank you so much for taking the time to join us, Managing Director for NZAB. Doug Avery has said that you are sound as a rock, Scott, and because it's come from Uncle Doug, that's a compliment.
I've never known Doug to tell a lie, so that's absolutely true.
He'll like that one. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us.
This is Sarah's Country.